God, I really like this poem. It's not easy. I think you probably spotted a pattern with NiChuilleanain. I think a lot of students, and I'm happy to be wrong, but I think a lot of students will prefer Heaney and Meehan and Yeats to NiChuilleanain because she's subtle, you know. There's a subtlety to her work. Sorry. There's a nuanced quality to her work. That's really interesting. Now, that's not to say there isn't subtlety and nuance to those other poets I mentioned, but NiChuilleanain's style is so, sorry now, it's so much, it's indirect. This is a good example of it. This poem is personal. It's one of her personal poems, and often, as I've said before, you don't read NiChuilleanain's poems and think necessarily it's very personal. Often her poetry is very philosophical. It's about ideas rather than about her, experience of life directly. But this poem just has a little touch. I love that at the end of the poem, she writes, Parma, 1963, Dublin, 1994. Now, what's important to know is that NiChuilleanain's mother died in Dublin in 1994. And that in 1963, so we're talking, I have to do it now, 30 years previously, NiChuilleanain had gone to visit Parma with her mother on a holiday. They particularly went to see this fresco, this beautiful piece of Renaissance art by a painter called Correggio. Sorry, I just had to check that. Yeah, Correggio. See there? His fresco of the Annunciation in Parma. So, in a way, this poem is like The Bend in the Road. It's a memory poem. Remember in The Bend in the Road, she tells a story, this little scenario of being on the way to the lake and the child was sick and they had to stop the car by the tree, and then the child was better and they went on. So in other words, it seems like quite an innocuous thing. And in this poem, she remembers going to Parma as a young woman, she was a young woman, with her mum, and standing underneath this amazing domed roof. That's what cupola is, and looking at this unbelievable work of art. And the work of art is the Annunciation. Now, if you don't know what the Annunciation is, I'm going to just play around here because I'm under no pressure. You can see I was doing this with Elizabeth Bishop earlier on. So this is the moment in the Bible when the angel Gabriel tells the Virgin Mary that she's going to carry Jesus, the Son of God. So, like, it's a moment of miraculous wonder. But it's a moment when a woman learns she's going to be a mother. And I want you to think about the two phrases I've just used there. Miraculous and motherhood. And that's what I think this poem is about. It's about the poet feeling grateful for the miracle of her mother. And suddenly what is very personal becomes relatable. And then you think about what's a fireman's lift. Well, again, I'm kind of arse around with this now for a second. So it might not be a phrase that you're familiar with. So sometimes it's easier just to show you. So that's a fireman's lift. So it's where you pick somebody up, throw them over your shoulder, and carry them along. And when the poet looks at this painting or thinks about this painting that she saw, and she thinks about this, well, it shows all these angels like supporting the journey up to heaven. She thinks about ideas to do with heaven and support and motherhood and miracles. I want to write those 4 words down here, okay? Because I want you to get this poem. I like this poem. Now, obviously, she's thinking about heaven and mother and ascension when she's writing the poem because her mother, who she loves, has died. The poem was written in 1994 following the death of her mother. So she's thinking about that. And she's maybe grateful for, having a mother like that, the miracle of having a woman who she loved and who she feels great gratitude for and appreciation of. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense. And then she draws a parallel with this amazing painting, Correggio's Annunciation, with her mother. So in other words, if we get that the work of art is miraculous and beautiful and singular, well then that's how she feels about her mother. So that parallel makes sense. But then there's more to it. Why call the poem Fireman's Lift? I think what the poet is doing in this poem is thinking about what her mother did for her, and if you want to extend that out, what our mothers do for us. They carry us along. They carry us from the moment of conception. They carry us. And then after birth, they continue to support us. They're like a pillar of strength, like the fireman lifting the victim away from danger. That's what the mother does. There's a heroism associated with the idea of motherhood. And finally, before I read the poem, and you might see some of these ideas, I want you to think about what heaven is supposed to be. Heaven is supposed to be sublime, a place of perfection. And I think there's an association in this poem with the sublime, with perfection, with idealism, and with how the poet feels about the mother who she loved and who she now grieves. It's not a sad poem. For me, this is a poem about celebration. A celebration of a life. It's interesting that she writes 2 poems on the course, To Nile Woods and Xenia Ostrovskaya, and this poem, one is about the beginning of the journey, her son's marriage, and then this poem, which is about the end of a journey. And again, I think journeys, Death and Engines, The Last Voyage, I'm trying to think now, All for You, The Bend in the Road, journeys as a metaphor, the journey as a metaphor for life is something that you see in NiChuilleanain's poetry. Love this poem. Hope I do a good job going through it. I was standing beside you, looking up through the big tree of the cupola. So that's the branched sections of the dome. where the church splits wide open to admit celestial choirs, the fallout of brightness. So there's this moment being described. She's with her mother and they're sharing this awe as they look up at this burst of colour, this magnificent painting that they see for the first time and that they marvel at. It's a shared experience. The Virgin was spiralling to heaven, hauled up in stages. So this is the image of Mary being taken to heaven to be given the child that she will then carry to birth. Past mist and shining teams of angelic arms were heaving, supporting, crowding her. And we stepped back as the painter longed to, while his arms swept in the wide strokes. We saw the work entire. Now, for me, that's the most important line, or those two quotes that I've just marked there. They're the most important lines in the poem. There's another I'm going to come to now in a moment. To step back, you're looking at something, step back, it gives you perspective. When you're up close to something, it's hard to see the full picture. The poet is imagining the artist who must have been up on scaffolding, painting each individual part. And she's imagining, she's thinking about the work that went into that, the arms sweeping with wide strokes. And she's talking about how when you're up close to something, you can't see the full majesty of it. It's only when you take a step back that you see the full majesty. Now think about that as a metaphor for love and for loving the people with whom we share our lives. Think about that as a metaphor for the poet talking about how she feels about her mother. When we share our lives with people, when we're up close to them, we don't necessarily always see and appreciate how wonderful they are. But when we are forced to step back through absence, through separation, in this case through the separation brought on by a death, we get a better picture, a better sense of the full majesty of that person, of the beauty of that person, of the importance and the value of that person. In the same way as when you pull away from the painting and you see the full spectrum, you get a better sense of the achievement. It's beautiful. I love it. We saw the work entire and how the light melted, and she describes the painting, and faded bodies so that loose feet and elbows and staring eyes floated in the wide stone petticoat, clear and free as weeds. Now, I like that little simile. I'm not mad about that stanza because it's quite difficult, but what she's simply doing is describing the piece of art with all of these crowded bodies. It's actually, there's a photograph of it is it in this note? Not sure if it is. It's in one of the notes that I'll show you. But anyway, she's just describing the piece of art. And I love that, clear and free as weeds. It's an unusual little simile. Weeds, are not necessarily things that we welcome. They're like we try to eradicate them from our gardens, but they grow with freedom. So there's an association of freedom with this feeling she had while she was there looking at the painting. It's not massively important. What is really important is what comes next. She says, this is my favourite line in the poem. This is what love sees, that angle. Now I'm going to come back to it in a second. The crick and the branch loaded with fruit, a jaw defining itself, a shoulder yoked, the back making itself a roof, the legs a bridge, the hands a crane and cradle. There's your fireman's lift. Their heads bowed over to reflect on her fair face and hair so like their own. Now that has to be the poet talking about her own mother. The head bowing, surely emblematic of grief. reflecting, thinking about how like she is to her mother, how she is of her mother. And then there's this image of her passing through their hands. We saw them lifting her, the pillars of their arms, her face a capital leaning into an arch, as the muscles clung and shifted for the final purchase together under her weight as she came to the edge of a cloud. Now that is not easy. The images of like the face a capital leaning into an arch. These are all descriptions of the painting of the fresco. But just drill down. Look at what the poet is saying. You look at this piece of art and you see something particular that makes you go, wow. And what you see, because it's so complex and because it's so wonderful, might not be the same thing as what somebody else sees. If I love somebody, I see in them things that other people might not see. My particular experience of them, my particular perspective of them informs my sense of who they are and my appreciation of what they are. That's what love sees, that angle. That particular singular quality of the person from the relationship I have with them. That's what love sees. And that's an extraordinary insight from the poet. There's so much going on. She describes the painting and all of the different things. But what she sees is the angels with their heads bowed. They're showing reverence. And this reflects her feeling for her mother. And the connection with their fair face and hair, so like their own. So if they were angels, they see in her an angel, a singular being. And if the poet thinks about her grief for her mother, she has to recognize and feel grateful for the fact that she is of her mother, that that's where she comes from. And then you have this section here, which describes again the painting as the figure of the Virgin reaches the edge of the cloud and is about to go into heaven. And there's an image then of disappearing. It reminds me so much of The Bend in the Road, a poem in which he talked about the one cumulus cloud in a perfect sky. These images of the ethereal nature of clouds, that they're there but we can't touch them. And for me, that last line references her mother and her death, that she's now gone beyond the tangible, gone beyond the mortal, ascended into heaven. And the overarching, overwhelming feeling of the poem is that the poet's sense of awe, which is captured in all those little details that can be annoying and distracting and confusing, but all those little details that she describes in the poem, like the muscles cling, shift, the pillars of her arms, the back making itself a roof, all those little details communicate the sense of awe and appreciation that she had for the painting. And that reflects the sense of awe and appreciation she has for her mother. Especially now that she has stepped back. This is what love sees. So, a subtle, nuanced, personal poem which describes sorry, I'm having a moment here. It describes the Annunciation. But really, it's a poem about motherhood. It's about love. It's about the sense of support that she felt from her mother. It's about the miracle of motherhood, of what a mother gives to her child, what her mother gave to her. It depicts the mother in heroic, angelic, saintly terms. It's a celebration of a life at a moment of grief. Not an easy poem, but a really interesting poem. I hope that made some sense. It's Fireman's Lift by Eilean NiChuilleanain.